And welcome back to yet another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports podcast where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s to today. Today's topic is why and when did football become king? In the 80s and 90s, sports in this country was dominated by the iconic athlete. Whether it's Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan, Joe Montana, Lawrence Taylor, Carl Lewis, Steffi Graf, Dale Earnhardt. Icons everywhere. Greg Louganis, Mary Lou Retton. The 80s was blessed. It was economic boom in America. It was fun times with Reaganomics. Then the 90s came, and the 90s ushered us into a different kind of world. Baseball was still kind of king. The NFL was slowly but surely, surprisingly, doing okay because of the Dallas Cowboys. But in the 80s, in the NFL in particular, it was all about the NFC. The AFC only won, 2 Super Bowls in the 80s, and it was by the Raiders both times. I think they won the Super Bowl in 1980, and I think they won the Super Bowl in 83, when Marcus Allen ran all over the Washington Redskins, who are now called the Washington Football Team, or the Washington Commanders, excuse me. Baseball was rocked with scandal, but so was the NFL. The NFL had major scandal. Steroids, drugs permeated all sports. Didn't hit baseball, though, in the steroid thing until the 90s, but people speculate that it just wasn't a football thing. There were other drugs that people were doing that hurt the sports. But the cleanest athlete of the 80s, 90s, Gretzky, Jordan, Montana, they helped build the sport world of that era. Baseball didn't have a superstar that carried that era. Ken Griffey Jr. didn't come around to the late 80s. Prior to Ken Griffey Jr., we were still holding on to some of the athletes of the 70s. The Yankees stunk in the 80s. The Mets started to come on in the mid 80s. It was about St. Louis. It was about the Dodgers and the Phillies and a young kid by the name of Cal Ripken Jr. But for some reason, baseball still held on to its place in sports culture. Basketball took over sports culture because the Olympics, we followed them in 84 and 88 when we lost. The 92 was the dream team. Basketball became huge. Baseball started to get off the front page because of scandal, because of steroids, and probably because there wasn't really a dominant team. As I said a minute ago, the Cowboys, I think, saved the NFL because the 90s was a decade of multiple championships, but the NFC had two super teams. It had the 49ers and the Cowboys. The AFC in the 90s, Buffalo was still trying to get it done, trying to get that Super Bowl. Couldn't get it done. John Elway finally got it done, and then Denver took over the latter part of the 90s. But that apparently got more people watching TV, watching football. College football in the 80s was dominated by the running backs. George Rogers, Herschel Walker, Marcus Dupree, Bo Jackson, Marcus Allen. The majority of the Heisman Trophy winners, Barry Sanders, were running backs in the 80s. And maybe that is why college football wasn't what it is today, because it wasn't as showy. Although there's nothing more exciting than watching a guy get a handoff, get a pitch from a quarterback and go 75, 80 yards, 90 yards. Mike Rozier. Remember that name? He won the Heisman Trophy from Nebraska. But then Vinny Testaverde came along. Ty Detmer came along in the 90s. And they started winning. The quarterbacks all of a sudden started winning Heismans. And made the Heisman Trophy a little bit more interesting because in the 60s and the 70s, football was dominated by running backs. In the 80s, same thing. In the 90s, here comes the QBs. And so I'm trying to figure out, as I'm scratching my head, why did football all of a sudden just kick baseball to the curb, kick basketball to the curb? I think football kicked baseball to the curb because baseball became a Latino sport in America. Majority of the baseball teams are flooded with Latino players. And a lot of the Latino players, not their fault, of course, didn't understand English. And so they didn't like to do interviews because they were afraid they were going to be teased. And basically, much rather spoke in their language and didn't really want to learn English. And so therefore, America stopped watching because it wasn't the black people doing it, not many of the white people doing it. It became the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Venezuela. They took over the sport. Cuba. And America said, fine. We won't watch you. We'll watch Mike. We'll watch Kobe. We'll watch Shaq. And then the NBA said, hey, let's open the door to the world. Let's bring in Detlef Schrempf. Let's bring in Yao Ming. Let us bring in Luka Doncic. Let us bring in Ricky Rubio, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker. Let us internationalize the game. And the American public said, we don't want to watch that either. We want to watch our American stars dominate. We're tired of Mike. We know we're tired of Mike, but we love Mike. We loved Larry. We loved Magic. And so they said, nah, forget basketball. And then the hockey, which is Canada's sport, but it had a lot of good American players. Brendan Shanahan, great American player. And hockey, we don't mind Canadians. We love Gretzky. We loved Mark Messier. We love Mario Lemieux. But there's too many internationals. So ESPN said, we need to get hockey off the network for years. So we don't get to see Mike Modano. We don't get to see the golden Brett Hall. We don't get to see them. Jeremy Roenick. Because ESPN took hockey off its airs and said, you go to NBC, get your own network. People who are true hockey fans will find you. So hockey lost. But the one thing that ESPN and all the networks said that needs to be American and needs to be prevalent in this country is football. And we need to really pump, quote unquote, America's team. And we need to find America's athlete. And we need to find America's face of the sport. And guess who that became? That's right, you guessed it. 6'5", 222 pounds from Michigan, playing in New England. Looks like a supermodel, dating a supermodel, dating the best looking woman in the world. 6th-round draft pick that no one's ever thought would be a good NFL player because he ran a slow 40 time. He ripped. He's no Beckham. He's just simply Tommy. And America said, that's our guy. Joe Montana was that guy in the 80s. He had the beautiful Jennifer Montana on his arm. But the difference between Tommy and Joey was Joey got hurt. Tommy got hurt for one season, missed the whole year. Hurt first game of the season. Somebody tackled him low, just like they did Carson Palmer, and ended Tommy's season. But by that time, Tommy had got a couple rings. And then Tommy came back. And not only was football appealing to the men around the world, it brought in the ladies. Because the ladies wanted to see Tommy just as badly as the ladies wanted to see Dan Marino. In the 70s, the two most popular quarterbacks was Terry Bradshaw and Roger Staubach. But the difference was Terry Bradshaw didn't look like Tommy or Joey. Roger Staubach was an American hero, G.I. Joe. Went to the Naval Academy, loved America, loved his country, served his country, played in the NFL. Captain Comeback used to make unbelievable plays. And he was the man. In the 80s, we had Elway. We had Marino. But Elway was defiant. Elway was a brat. Elway said, hell no, I ain't going to Indianapolis. I'll play baseball. And so they said, all right, we'll call your bluff. And then they said, okay, he's not bluffing. So they traded him to Denver. and he got his wish. Dan Marino kind of came out of nowhere because he was late first round pick, had that unbelievable start to his career, but didn't win. He lost to Joey in the Super Bowl. And once he lost to Joey in the Super Bowl, that was a wrap. Joey started knocking everybody out. Beat Marino, beat Elway, beat Boomer, beat Kenny Anderson. Joey was the guy. But Tommy's on Mount Olympus. Tommy is super God. And he brought football to what it is, even though Patriots didn't win because of him all the time. They won because of the defense. But Tommy made it popular. And it's funny because people started to hate Michael Jordan because they got sick of the Bulls, sick of him on every commercial, sick of him winning all the time, beating the Knicks, beating the Pacers, beating the Lakers. He did what Montana did. He said, all right, these are the best players of my era. And I'm going to beat you in the finals. I'm going to beat you, Magic. I'm going to beat you, Gary Payton. I'm going to beat you, Clyde. I'm going to beat you, Carl. And dagnabbit, I'm going to beat you, Patrick. Now, he didn't get to face Akeem or David Robinson in the finals, which people say really would have cemented him as the GOAT, which I still think he is, because he didn't get to play Olajuwon, but not his fault. His team was there. Olajuwon's team lost to Utah. David Robinson's team lost to Olajuwon. But my point is, it's so funny. This country hates when you're great, when you're dominant, except for Tommy. They love them some Tommy. I watch the news and I'm watching CBS Evening News, and Norah O'Donnell says, the GOAT. And she says it with such cute aplomb. The GOAT, Tom Brady, has decided to step down. And you laugh. Because you're like, I'm not saying Norah can't be a football player, and I'm not saying women can't be football fans. But I don't remember CBS Evening News and and Diane Sawyer saying, and Joe Montana, the GOAT, has stepped down. No, only Tommy. When Michael Jordan retired, yes, it was a national news conference because everyone was like, the first time everyone was like, what? You just won 3 championships. What the heck are you doing? And he's like, I'm bored. This ain't even a challenge, dude. We rolling everybody. And maybe that added to why people couldn't stand Mike, because Mike said that people, the challenge wasn't there. And his beautiful wife was sitting next to him, and they were like, yeah, when the challenge ain't worth it, it ain't worth it. I want to be challenged. Which is funny. But football became king, and I didn't even think of this until just talking it out loud, because of Tommy. ESPN started hiring every Patriot, the CBS, NBC, Fox, tried to bring in Patriots, former Patriot players to give analysis as to why and how other teams can succeed, all because of Tommy. See, I say Lawrence Taylor is the greatest football player ever to live because on the field, he revolutionized the game. He created jobs for half the league. You had to bring in tackles, you had to bring in fullback, you had to bring in tight ends, And every team felt they needed to draft defensive linebackers who could rush the passer with speed. He created positions in football. Period. One man. Reggie White didn't create positions. Bruce Smith didn't create positions. I ain't never heard anybody say, well, Tom Brady, the Jets are drafting this defensive back because of Brady. Darrelle Revis happened. No one knew Darrelle Revis would be as great as he was. And then Darrelle Revis went to the Patriots. And let's say you give that credit. You say, okay, the Jets drafted Darrelle Revis for Brady. That's one player. The entire league drafted tackles, tight ends, fullbacks, running backs, and turned them made them get bigger. Say, listen, I know you're 6'3", 210 pounds. That's pretty good size for a running back. But we need you to be 240 because you got to block that Taylor guy. We need you to be 250. You're tight end. You're kind of an in-between. Yeah, we need you to put on like another 30 pounds because you got to be able to block that Taylor guy. I digress. But the point is, football became king because of Tommy. Now you say, why is this a big issue to you? Why are you bringing this up? It's a big issue to me because for some reason, September 1st, baseball is not over, but on network television, it is over. Because we're in playoffs now here in October, and baseball is the fifth story on SportsCenter. You have playoff games that are put on Fox Sports 1 so that college football can be played on a Saturday. You have Monday Night Football where the more intriguing matchup in the playoffs is Texas and Houston. That gets bumped to the 1 o'clock hour so that way the Cowboys who are playing at night can be seen by the whole nation. So the people in the state of Texas don't have to choose. They can watch baseball in the day, football at night. Football has become king. Football has become king so much that the most popular sports talk show on television, First Take, talks about football year-round. NFL Live year-round. Baseball Tonight was ESPN's best show for years. It's now pushed to Sunday only. And if you have ESPN2, maybe it's on 1 or 2 times a week. But College Football Live is on every day. NFL Live is on every day. NBA Today is on every day. Tennis is pushed to the Tennis Network. Golf is pushed to the Golf Network, unless it's a major tournament. ESPN used to show tennis and golf all the time. Not during football season. Push that stuff out the way. Not even during basketball season, except for if it's a major tournament. An NFL draft. Enormous. The Heisman Trophy used to be awarded. They had a ceremony, always. And it didn't get as much coverage as it does now. It used to just be a 30-minute show. Now we get to meet all the candidates, meet their moms, their high school coaches, talk to their college coach, talk to them. It's a full-on production. And now that there's a baseball network, baseball's shoved to the baseball network. But there's an NBA network, but ESPN's like, so what? NBA spread all over a couple channels. TNT, NBA channel, and ESPN and ABC. Football is everywhere. CBS, NBC, the CW, ABC, Fox, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, ESPN News, CBS Sports Network, Fox Sports 1, Fox Sports 2. That's 12 networks. Not to mention the ACC network, the SEC network, the Texas Longhorn network, Pac-12 network, Big Ten network. They covered almost 20 channels. Does the ACC have a network? I think the ACC does have a network. They cover it's over 20 channels. Same thing with college basketball. But baseball, America's pastime, America's game. Remember that? Remember that Ken Burns multi episode documentary about baseball? One of the greatest things I've ever watched in my life. Baseball. Gone. It's football world. And then people wonder why we are so aggressive, why we are so, we have so much pent up aggression inside of us because of football. And I'm going to say this before I end. I've talked for 27 minutes. It's the longest show I've ever done. I'm not saying that, well, maybe I am kind of saying it's because of race. Because football consistently has good white players and good black players, and it's supposed to form a melting pot of success, and it does. But when the leading best player and the leading face of the league was a white guy, America's watching. But then you could say, well, that's kind of true because when Mike was the leading face of sports, America was watching too. America hasn't gotten behind LeBron, and this is why, and I'll say this and I'll stop. This is what LeBron hasn't figured out yet. And it's too late for him to figure out because his career is practically almost over. Can you imagine if all these GOAT conversations never happened for him? Can you imagine how many more people would like him and how unpolarizing he would be? How more exciting he would be? Because you can't watch him and not pick at him now. Or pick at him over the last 15, 18, 20 years that he's been playing. You can't stop doing it. Because somebody's going to say, this is why he's the greatest of all time. And you're going to say, no, he's not. So you've created anger towards him. Same thing about Tommy. But the difference between Tommy and Joe, or Tommy and Lawrence Taylor, unfortunately, Lawrence Taylor has done things negatively that has crushed his legacy, so people don't take him, people who don't love the Giants or don't love football, kind of speak about him sadly. I wear my Lawrence Taylor jersey all the time. I wore it to a Chargers game, and it was like people were looking at me and they wanted to like eulogize him. But his own former coach, Bill Belichick, who coached Lawrence Taylor and Tom Brady, brings Lawrence Taylor's name up all the time in practice, apparently. In Montana, people don't remember Joe being great because Joe got hurt too much. And especially towards the end, he had issues. They were like, should it be Steve Young or him? His elbow hurt, shoulder hurt, back hurt. And they moved him out, brought Steve Young in. And then Steve Young won a championship. And everyone was like, well, maybe Montana wasn't so great. Maybe it was the system. But my era remembers Joe Montana. My era loves Joe Montana. This era loves Tommy. Because Tommy left Patriots, went to Tampa, and won again. So people can say, okay, you can say it was a system in New England, but then he went to Tampa and won. And I can argue back against that because in Tampa, they gave him an all-star team. And the Patriots now are depleted and been depleted since. Football is king. For now.